Hello and welcome to First Flight, a Star Trek Enterprise rewatch podcast where we are watching and discussing each episode of Enterprise in succession. First Flight is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network.
This is Commander Tucker of Enterprise. We've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Welcome, Enterprise fans. I'm your co-host, Melanie.
And I'm your co-host, Abby.
And tonight we are discussing Civilization, the 8th episode of Season 1. It was written by Phyllis Strong and Mike Sussman and directed by Mike Vehar. It aired on November 14th, 2001. But before we begin our discussion, we need to issue a read alert.
Tactical alert. All hands to stations.
There are potential spoilers ahead. We might end up talking about any part of the series at any time. And now for a summary of the episode, it's time for Abby's Captain's Log. Okay, Abby, let's go.
Captain Starlog Supplemental.
All right, my recap of Civilization. T'Pol finds unusual neutrino readings on a planet with an Earth-like pre-industrial society that is suffering with a plague seemingly caused by mysterious visitors.
All right, it's time to deploy our subspace transmitters and get into this. Abby, what did you think of Civilization?
Well, I hope people aren't getting sick of me talking about cold opens, but this was another fantastic cold open. I love that we saw them with their morning briefing, and I like that they were all kind of talking amongst themselves, and then Archer walks in, and they totally prank him. Just as much grief as he's given them now that they're all kind of chummier, they gave it right back, and that was perfect. Even T'Pol in on the joke. And at the end when he's like, you know, you could have put that one at the top of the list. And she just kind of gives him a little eyebrow. Like, this is perfect. And this is the kind of family that we love all of our Star Trek crews to become. And when you think about that, this is still in the first third of season 1, and we're already seeing this build. What a nice way to start this episode.
Yeah, I agree. I loved that prank also. That was heartwarming and funny, and the banter between them and pranking and joking around with Archer. That was really cool. And another part that I liked at the beginning of the episode here was when once again T'Pol and Archer are debating, do we do probes? Do we send people down? They seem to keep having the same conversation at the beginning of some episodes. And Archer is pushing back about, hey, we want to get down there. When he says Starfleet could have sent a probe, but no, they sent us to explore. I really liked that quote.
I agree. That's a beautiful quote. And I like that we know the Prime Directive is coming, and we know that it's going to be the founding principle of the Federation. But seeing all the reasons why it came into effect and how the Vulcans have something sort of like it already. And all these discussions are just showing why it became the Prime Directive. And it's neat to see that. And I know some people, when we were first watching Enterprise, were like, all right, when are they going to get to the Prime Directive? Because they're making a lot of mistakes. But I like that aspect of it. I like the fact that they have to try some things and have things go right and have things go wrong before they realize and really see and understand how their presence can have some of these consequences, whether positive or negative, and to realize that they need to give a wider berth than perhaps what they'd been doing. So this is kind of the first nuggets of the Prime Directive coming into play.
Good point. And I also enjoy how when T'Pol's talking about Vulcan protocols, it's about generally we don't visit pre-warp societies, and perhaps you all should adopt these protocols. The foreshadowing there that we do end up adopting some of those Vulcan protocols, I thought was really interesting conversation.
All right, I'm going to jump a little bit and talk about Hoshi and the language, because what a beautiful Hoshi moment when she's over there just giggling with glee, listening to all the different languages, and to the point that Archer comes over and kind of gives her a little, y'all good? And she's like, this is amazing. And I could spend 10 years studying all this. This is like, all of us Star Trek nerds coming into a new season of a new show and going, oh, there's so much here. And I have to digest it. And I love it. And I'm so excited. And to see that joy from her, amazing. And then when she gets picked because of her language skills, to get to be the first one to go down to the planet, and Archer saying, if the UT fails, you're our best hope. And she has grown so much since the first and second episodes when she was just scared to even be on the ship. And now she's like, okay, I guess you're right. I'm going to do it. And that is such growth for her as a character. And she is so beautiful in the costume and makeup. I mean, she always is, but wow, that's a beautiful woman and smart to boot.
I mean, Hoshi is definitely showing growth when you think back to the Sluggo episode and all of that. And whenever she talks about, wow, there's, 50 dialects down there or whatever the number of dialects are per episode, it reminds you of how brilliant she is that she can identify and decipher different dialects and work on that. Like, she is such a brilliant linguist, and they are very lucky to have her. And speaking of those costumes, I really loved the costumes. And I want to say that back in the day, I used to do Renaissance fairs.
Yay.
And I can't help but say that this reminded me of that. So that was a nice chuckle memory for me. Great costumes, and Archer's was awesome too.
Yeah, I think that one of the strong points of Star Trek really has always been costuming. Then it's interesting because it doesn't get a lot of recognition, but their work on the costumes and the details are just amazing. I mean, when you think about Archer's, and it's got those leather straps around the torso part of it, and things are all woven and there's multiple colors. They have capes. Like, obviously, the quartermaster has a big closet, but wow, the costume designers on this, absolutely stunning. And the makeup too. And I love that Phlox is trying to make it perfectly symmetrical. And like, it was just a really cool scene. And all of them have gorgeous costumes, both our crew and the people on the planet. It's really neat to see.
Yes. And, when they get down to the planet and Archer makes that comment about breaking and entering, I loved that line because, first of all, it was funny. I thought, good line. And secondly, it again reminds me that this isn't that far in the future. I mean, it is, 130 years or whatever, but they're still using terminology like breaking and entering. So it grounds it to our times as well. And I liked that sequence of them entering the shop. And I have to say that even though this episode is, shall we say, not spectacular, it has its pros and cons. It's kind of middling, in my opinion. Enjoyable, but even though that's the case, I do think that the Rian character is very strong. And in watching this episode, I really liked that actress and I thought she pulled it off. I thought Rian was a strength of this episode.
Yeah, I very much enjoy her as well. And I think the interaction, brief as it might be, with her and T'Pol is very telling too. And I love that Archer doesn't even blink, surrounding himself with strong, smart women. I mean, Hoshi, T'Pol, Rian, this is a group of women who have amazing intellectual abilities. And later on, when Phlox is saying, she's using investigative and forensic techniques that are well past her time, that's cool. And I really enjoyed that they didn't just make her, the woman who had a theory that turned out to be right. No, she was the scientist. She was the smart one. She had it all down. And I think it was interesting that they chose to let her know as much about them as they do in the end. Now, granted, we know it's pre-prime directive and all that, but she knows quite a great deal. And they just tell her, maybe don't mention this. So they trust her enough and know that she's smart enough to understand the repercussions if she would bring this up to anybody else. But I do kind of wonder, like, she seems like the woman who'd keep a journal or a diary or something like that. I wonder if she, put it in there and left it for a descendant or something in her will or for the future. And, don't open this for 150 years or something. I just think I would have a hard time with that and not telling anybody, but maybe that's just me.
I agree, because that's pretty spectacular stuff. And it was interesting.
That's world shaking.
Very world shaking. But it's interesting to me that when she got the world shaking information, it's a testament to Rian's intelligence and everything that we were just talking about, that she actually rolls with it fairly well. She doesn't stand there and go, oh my God, which is what I would probably do. So
Me too.
I have to give her credit. The way that she was written, I enjoyed. This was one of the stronger guest stars, I thought, of the season. And I did enjoy that aspect of the episode.
And I love how Archer, the first person that we really see him attracted to, is a smart woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that says a lot about him. And I think we see that as the series goes on, that's what he wants. He wants someone who can spar with him, who can, keep him on his toes, who's his equal. And that's why he and T'Pol get along. It's not a romantic relationship, but he wants somebody there who's going to push him and challenge him and, expand his mind. And I do wonder at the very end of this, after the second time that they kiss, do you think he stayed?
I don't think so.
Okay. I don't either, but I know they left it ambiguous for a reason. And I just always am impressed that all aliens seem to have the same types of affection that we do. Like, a kiss is a kiss everywhere else. For all we know, that, they like to rub toes. So I always think that he left after that too, and left it simple and sweet, but letting her know that, yes, there is a connection here.
Yeah. And, speaking of, you mentioned T'Pol and Archer, we talk about T'Pol's little barbs and quips, and her line, enjoy your tea, is great. I love that.
I do too. And the look that accompanies it is just the most T'Pol thing ever. And I also love when they were first in the shop and she has to shoot Rian. And Archer looks at her and goes, let's try not to shoot anyone else while we're here. And T'Pol just totally deadpans, I'll try. Those are just some of the things that really make me like T'Pol. And I don't think the character is necessarily trying to be funny, but oh man, she knows that she's making some hits there.
Definitely. And she certainly observes that something's going on between Archer and Rian. So I found that intriguing when he's like, go back to the ship. I'll follow later. Okay. Another thing about this episode I wanted to mention is, like Terra Nova, this episode has a TOS feel to me as well. It has that kind of throwback feeling of, let's visit a planet like this.
Agreed.
And even with Archer and Rian having their little flirtation, that couldn't help remind me of Kirk in the Alien of the Week. So it had that feel. And one more TOS callback. I found it so interesting that we got to see the Malurians, who we hear about in the original series episode, The Changeling, when Nomad ends up wiping out their system and killing 4 billion Malurians. Not cool, Nomad. So it was really fascinating to be able to see them here in this episode. That was super cool.
I also find it fascinating, which is the perfect word for it. So let's talk a little bit about these Malurians and Garros, the shopkeeper. Man, he is so slick and so smooth and so obviously just, I am the bad guy. And even though I say things that possibly could be plausible, I'm the bad guy. And that's a good thing and not a good thing at the same time. But he plays a great bad guy. I feel like there was more scenes of this where he got a little bit more depth that we didn't necessarily see.
Mm-hmm.
And this is jumping ahead just a tiny little bit, but after the fight with him and Archer, when his prosthetic, whatever it is, got pulled off, he put it back on really quickly and really well, because he pops back up a bunch of times and it doesn't even look like he's had his face peeled off. So you know what? He must have had a lot of practice going in and out of that makeup, because I can't imagine he'd sleep in it and stuff. So, bad guy's going to get those bad guy skills.
I didn't even think about that. You're right. He was seen later with it back on. That is funny.
Just made me laugh. I'm like, wow, he really is a good bad guy to have on your side. He is just a master of disguise. So bravo. But I think it's pretty obvious from the get-go that he is the bad guy. They don't believe anything he's saying, and he shoos him out of there. Now, he has a customer. Everything he says is plausible, but no.
I agree. It would have been nice to learn a little bit more about the Malorians, in addition to the ones who are mining on the planet, to get a little more thorough reading on them. And I do have to say that the Malorian ship design was pretty cool also.
Yeah, and one of the things that almost became my Porthos pick later is their transporter effect when they beam their people off after Archer gets the better of them is really beautiful. And it's similar to the transporter effects we see for other species, but it's got this little extra bit of like shimmer and color that's different than everyone else. And I know that very few people are going to care about different species having different transporter effects, but I love that the people who make Star Trek pay that much attention to the tiny little details.
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention that, you know how they show the mining operations through that window?
Yep.
It reminded me of the listening center in the Andorian incident. It had that similar vibe and look. So since we had just seen that, it reminded me of that.
I agree. It's a window instead of a little ledge, but yes, they looked very similar. But I guess, if you're hiding underground, there's only so much you can do.
True. I wanted to talk a little bit about the universal translator.
Go for it.
Okay, here are my thoughts. Let me preface this with, it might sound like I'm nitpicking, but I have actual serious scientific questions about this that I want to run by you.
Sure.
So here we go. First of all, let me say that I completely understand that watching Star Trek, we have to suspend our disbelief that whether it's TOS or TNG or whatever series, we're going to end up speaking English to a whole bunch of aliens. That's accepted. We accept it. I've never questioned it before. It is what it is. That's science fiction. That's television. And we did see the UT in Metamorphosis and TOS, and I happen to love that episode, and I have thoughts about that one as well. And it was done really well there, where they explained that there are universal concepts and all of that. Fine. Okay. But since Enterprise is making a point of discussing the development of the UT, it does lead me to some questions.
Ready.
Okay. My first question is, it was my understanding that you have to know the other language to program it. There have been a few episodes where Hoshi is trying to get enough words in there, like in Fight or Flight,
right,
to make the universal translator work. So my first question is, if you encounter a species that you don't know and you haven't programmed their language, then how does it work? Because later they imply that it works with anyone you meet. It just automatically translates. And maybe it got more advanced later on, but I'm a little unclear on that. My second question is the understanding that when you speak into the device, that it kind of affects the brain waves of the other person, including you, so that they're hearing it through their auditory system? I've actually looked it up and Googled it, but I'm still slightly unclear. And however it works, it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away from my enjoyment, and I suspend my disbelief, and I love it. But I find it intriguing scientifically, and I'm just slightly confused.
Yeah, I've always wondered some of the same things, especially with this and with what Hoshi's doing and all of that. I don't have any good answers for either one of those, but I was thinking that especially in the scene where Archer's communicator isn't working and he is hearing Rian, but she's speaking her native tongue, and then he's got to figure out a way to do it. Well, if he's holding that communicator open to try to figure stuff out, what are they each hearing? And she's a bright woman. Of course, she figured it out and even referenced it later. But yeah, there's a lot of technical things there. And I think we have to go with the magic hand waving of TV and think that a lot of these things were solved off screen. And
sure,
it's just massively convenient. But I would love to know if any of our listeners have a good article or a book or a website or anything that would enlighten both of us into if someone who's compiled all that we know and tried to make sense of it, please share that with us, because we would both like to talk about it and read it, because this is going to come up again.
Right. And I'm happy with the magic hand wave. It doesn't upset me. I'm not criticizing. It just honestly intrigues me.
Agreed.
And it was a cool scene when he did have to fiddle with that thing and put an input in or whatever he did. I thought it was cool that they showed that.
Well, and I think it was interesting that he fell back on what he knew would probably be the most distracting thing he could do to give himself time.
Mhm.
So, bravo to Archer, because if I was in that situation, I don't know what I would do besides probably curse. And that would probably be the one thing that did translate.
Right. And it didn't rattle him. Again, Archer is so good at what he does. It didn't rattle him. He just stayed the course and figured it out and solved the problem. And I liked that.
Absolutely. Speaking of solving the problem, can we talk for a minute about the bridge crew and the scene where T'Pol's in command and they're taking care of that reactor and everything after the fight?
Yes.
Our bridge crew is coming together so nicely. I mean, they are back and forth. And even though Trip has to say that he's preparing to vent the nacelles, as soon as T'Pol clarifies and goes, I didn't say break orbit. I said prepare to break orbit. And he was like, oh, gotcha. Because of course he doesn't want to leave the captain behind. But as soon as he realizes that she's got more of a plan there, he's cool with it. And even though they're questioning it at first, once they get going, they are just falling into place, and it's step after step after step, and they are in sync, and that's a beautiful sequence.
I agree. Our crew is savvy. They know what they're doing. They are coming together. I remember in Unexpected, you were talking about how they figured out that the other ship was hiding in the wake and all of that. And here's another example. This is a top-notch crew, and it's wonderful to see them working together like that. And Trip and T'Pol have a few other scenes like that in other episodes as well. Remember, it happened in Broken Bow, where, of course, they didn't know each other.
Yes.
As well as they do now. And I think Trip was slightly embarrassed that he misunderstood that. It seemed to me, that look on his face. I could be wrong.
I agree.
But they worked it out quickly. And I'm glad that he jumped in to defend his captain. But yep, they figured it out. And I thought that was cool too.
And Malcolm's torpedoes hit perfectly, and he got to blow something up again. So good day for Malcolm.
Yay, Malcolm. And I also thought it was cool, Abby, that Archer said that he would set up that the Vulcans would check on Rion's people from time to make sure they're okay and that the Malorians didn't come back. And I thought that was really well done because Archer's not having great relations with Vulcans in the past couple of episodes. So it was nice to see, some teamwork there and that he cares about them and that he was making sure that they were going to be okay.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I always hear people criticize TOS about is how they come into this planet, they fix it, they leave, they never come back. Well, we came in, we fixed it, but we're sending someone back to check up. And we know, later on Lower Decks that they do that too, but it's nice to actually hear that mentioned and referenced here because that's what you would do in real life.
Yep. Well, we've arrived at Porthos' pick, which is our favorite part of the episode. Abby, what's your favorite part?
All right, I have to say that this is another one of those tiny ones, and I'm finding that those have been my Porthos picks a lot lately. But this was kind of a throwaway line that made me sit up and go, because when Archer and Rian are talking in the alleyway and she's muttering to herself and she goes, sorry, it's a habit I have. And he goes, oh, it's okay. I have a habit of talking to my dog. And I was like, yes, you do. It's for plot exposition, but now it's canon. He talks to his dog. It's his habit. And I just thought that was so cute and so perfect and something that we've really enjoyed thus far and will continue to enjoy, I assume. So that was just a little moment that I think the writers were smiling at us.
Oh, that is so cool. I didn't think of that. And in addition, I just love when Archer talks about his dog because he loves him so much.
That nothing could make Enterprise better except more Porthos.
More Porthos. My favorite part was at the end when they say, well, they want their reactor back. Let's give it to them. I liked the sequence of lining up the reactor to blow up the ship. I just thought that was a really cool sequence. I liked the way it was shot.
I agree. And it had enough tension that you were like, oh, is this going to work? Even though you were pretty sure it was going to. And what a great plan from T'Pol. Again, that was a spur of the moment, great thought, great decision, pulling together all that she knew and doing something that really benefited the ship. So bravo to T'Pol for being awesome as always.
Accessing library computer data.
Well, it's time for the sharing of trivia. Abby, what do you have for us about Civilization?
Well, I thought it was interesting that you brought up the TOS connection with the Malorians, because Mike Sussman, who we know was one of the writers of this, is actually quoted as saying, it was like, wouldn't it be great to see these guys? So we made them the bad guys in Civilization, the green lizard guys. They get their comeuppance 100 years from now. And I just thought that was such a neat connection. And I love knowing that it was an intentional connection. And while I agree that Nomad should not have wiped them out, I think that this was a nice little bit of cosmic karma.
Yep, I hear you. And I have to say, I'm really pleased that Mike Sussman and Phyllis Strong joined the team here, because first of all, they do bring the love of TOS to the series. And secondly, they end up writing some really strong episodes. So welcome to that duo. They did a great job.
Lots to look forward to.
My trivia is that this episode shows the first time chronologically when a chief medical officer performs a cosmetic procedure to make someone look like another species. And I know we end up seeing this a lot in the franchise, and this was the very first time.
Transfer of data is complete.
Okay, we've reached our Vulcan's verdict. On a scale of 1 to 10 grapplers, how do you rate this one, Abby?
This episode was fine. It was predictable. It was nothing awful, nothing great, kind of meh, but a fine episode with some really nice little moments and callbacks and touches. So this one got a 6 out of 10 grapplers for me. How about you, Melanie?
I will say there are parts of this episode that I really enjoy. Well, it might be more middle of the road. There are parts that I do enjoy. I found it interesting. So I ended up giving it 6 out of 10 grapplers as well.
My chronometer's running backwards, sir.
Incoming transmission.
You read my letter?
All right, it's time for Daniels to send us back in the timeline so we can hear some of your picks and thoughts. Abby, what do you have for us tonight?
All right, so we're going back to episode 7, the Andorian incident, and talking about some of the feedback that we had from 3 of our listeners. The first one is from Noelle Reed Alert at Coffee Knoll on Twitter, and she said, got to use my backup Porthos pick here, as my first choice was one of yours, the reactions after the reveal. Love it when we match, Noelle. And she said that's the silent communication between Archer and Trip after Archer spots the Andorian's reflection. Trip picks up on Archer's signals immediately, and all it takes is a small nod to show he understands the plan. From there, the two are completely in sync, right down to the synchronized wall toppling. Now that, my friends, is teamwork.
I love it.
We love hearing Porthos picks, and Grappler ratings are so much fun to get. So thank you, Noelle, for that. We've had some amazing discussion going on Twitter about these. And this next one is an exchange between Peter Trek1 at Peter Trek1 and Jim Salvage at Salvage Jim talking about the same episode. And I really enjoyed this discourse, so I'm going to give you some snippets of it. So Peter starts, and it said, this episode is my favorite Enterprise Season 1 episode and is in my top 10 list of Enterprise episodes. I liked how it provided some shades of gray to both the Vulcans and Andorians. In this story, the Vulcans were portrayed in less than a positive light, hiding a secret. Conversely, the Andorians, whom we don't know much about, were portrayed in a more positive light by the end of the episode, when everyone realized they were right about the Vulcans and the role of Pajam all along. In addition, introducing Shran in this episode also starts the Archer-Shran dynamic, which is one of my favorites of Enterprise. And then Jim Salvage writes back, I really love this conversation here. The Vulcans aren't just the innocent space nerds we thought they were. They needed us to form the Federation to protect themselves from the Klingon and the Andorian empires. And Peter replies, yes, that's true. Before Enterprise, the Vulcans we saw were mostly, quote unquote, good ones. But Enterprise provided another perspective on their motivations. So thank you to both of you, gentlemen. The conversation goes on, and if you'd like to read the rest of it, I strongly suggest you go back to that Twitter thread under the Andorian incident, because we're getting some really neat discussion. So if anybody out there listening would like to send in a Porthos pick, a Grappler rating, or just have some cool conversation about Enterprise, this is the kind of fantastic things that our listeners are giving us. So our heartfelt thanks to you for the feedback and the discussion, because it's fun.
I agree. I want to thank Noelle for that awesome Porthos pick, and for Jim and Peter for that insightful conversation about the Vulcans that we thought we knew. And if you would like to continue this discussion with us, you can reach us at First Flight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And Abby, how can you best be reached?
You can get me at Abby M. Sommer on Twitter. That's SOMMER.
We want to thank you for spending this time with us, and we'll be back next time with Fortunate Son, the 9th episode of Season 1. And as always, we leave you with this quote from Captain Jonathan Archer. The most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.